Hello guys and gals, and this is part 25 of our reading of Pandora's Genes. We are almost done with this book. We have, this might be the last chapter. I'm not exactly sure. I mean the last part. We'll know soon enough. Anyways, as always, we're going to go over the copyright information, which is right here. It's copyright by, it's copyright 1985 by Kathryn Lance. I have the author's written permission to read this book on my channel. And so yeah. Also, book is the first part of a trilogy. So the second book being Pandora's Children and the third part being Pandora's Promise. And you can find copies of those books at a local library probably, or some of the bigger book retailers rather. Anyways, in the last part, the principal exiled Zach and Evie. She could go along too. She tried to convince Will, the principal, that there was a better solution, but he would have no part of it. Now he went for a walk, but he found these traitors on his property. So we're going to find out what he's going to do about that. All land is God's land, said the youth, his face white with fear and defiance. We was sent here, said the blind man in a feeble voice. The time of judgment is come on the capital and all its people. Traitor beliefs are against the law, the principal said. He thought of calling for his men, but they would probably not hear him at the distance. Clearly, he had nothing to fear from such a frightened, ill-organized band of refugees. Get off this land now. I won't arrest you if you go peaceably. Still making the sign of the spiral, the woman looked to the older men for guidance. The principal turned to look too, wondering what to do, wondering if he should have those wretched immigrants arrested. And then he was startled by a sudden shriek, as if truly the devil himself had suddenly appeared in the clearing. He whirled to see the youth brandishing a knife, but clinging to the young man's arm was Napoleon. His sharp, tiny teeth locked on the boy's wrist. At almost the same moment, there was a crashing in the brush, and beside him suddenly stood the two guards who had accompanied him on the preserve. One guard quickly subdued the young man, who had thrown the foxcat to the ground and was moaning and holding his wrist. The other had disarmed the old man, and who now looked bewildered and frightened. Filthy traitors, muttered Perry, the younger of the guards. The principal took a deep breath and let it out. You were ordered to stand at the perimeter, he shouted, aware that his anger was not really for the guards. Why are you here? Sorry, sir. Captain Robin ordered us to keep close behind you, sir. No matter what your orders. Again, the principal took a deep breath. Of course, Robin had done the right thing. He had sensed the mood the principal was in, although he had never really been in danger from these traitors. He realized that in other circumstances he might well have acted too rashly for his own safety. He suddenly remembered the little foxcat and turned. Napoleon was sitting in the clearing, mewling softly, licking his left forepaw, which seemed bent at an unnatural angle. He knelt and stroked the small furry head, then picked the animal up, trying not to touch the injured limb. Arrest these traitors, he said, fighting the incongruous feeling that he was giving the wrong order. When we return to the capital, see that they are questioned. Now, it's getting late. Let's go. As soon as he returned to his house, the principal had his personal physician tend to Napoleon, whose paw had been dislocated. Then he took food and drink and shut himself away in his office, the one place in the world where he felt most comfortable. He told himself that he had only to get through this one night, then Zach and Evie would be gone and everything would be as it was before. It was late, and the principal had been drinking since early evening. Tomorrow he would call a meeting of his generals to discuss the war with the traitors. Tomorrow he was to make an address, now twice put off, to a gathering of young boys just taken into his service. Tomorrow Zack would go into exile, probably with Evie, and he would never see either of them again. On his desk lay writing leaves, thickly scrawled over with his plans, his empire, the empire that was to save the world from certain destruction. In a room 50 feet down the hall, guarded by men that he knew were not needed, Zack slept or lay awake, preparing for his journey. And in Evie's room, the matters that had preoccupied him his whole life were far more important than anything that had happened in this office. Yet all he could think about was the events of the last days. And the look on Zack's face and on Evie's as he had announced what must be. Alexander, they said, had died from drink. It was the curse and the solace of a leader, of a man who took responsibility for others. He poured more brew but didn't touch it. He should try to sleep, but was reluctant to close his eyes on this, the last night that Zack and Evie lay sleeping in rooms so near that he could call out their names and they would hear. In a round basket beside the desk, the fox cat mewled softly in its sleep, its bandaged leg resting on a cushion. There was a sudden sound in the far corner of the room. He started, and his eyes traveled to a sword lying sheathed beside the desk. "What is it?" he called, knowing the answer already. In the corner was the door, which had not been used regularly in over 5 years, the door which led through the hidden corridor directly to Zack's room, and was used only by Zack when he wanted private access to the principal. His hands clenched into fists and watched the narrow door creak open. Then Zack stood before him, his throat constricted, as it had 3 days ago, when the couriers had brought their traitor prisoner to his office. There Zack stood now, and then alive, his brother, the person the principal had known the longest in his life and had loved the most, and who had betrayed him. Zack was holding a sheaf of paper, and once again the principal noticed how pale and gaunt he was, how sickly looking, and wanted to go to him and embrace him, but Zack had made that impossible. At the same time, the principal wanted to have Zack thrown into prison to watch him suffer on the machines. "I said that I would not see you again," he said. "What are you doing here?" "I'm not here to ask pardon," Zack said. "I know there can be none, but I must talk to you. I've been drawing up notes and making a map. Only listen to me, and if I were you, and if I were one of your generals... Only listen to me as if I were one of your generals, and let me tell you what I know of the traitors. If I can't do that, all this has been for nothing." The principal took one deep breath and let it out. "Sit then," he said, "and report." When Zack had finished, it was very late. The principal's head ached from the details. The biggest difficulty in trying to fight the traitors had been their apparent lack of formal structure, and now he had the key to their organization. The town where Zack had been held seemed to be the center of the empire, and with the aid of the map, it should be possible to find it and destroy it. Overcoming the enemy would not be easy, but with this new information, he would be able, at least, to start. "That's everything I know," said Zack. "If I find out anything else that may be of help, I will try to send word to you." "You're not returning to the traitor empire?" Zack shook his head. "I don't know. I will go where I must and do what I can to help you fight them. It's our shared purpose, and it's what's left." He sighed and rose. He seemed about to turn away, but still stood there. "Will," he said finally, "I want you to know I am sorry. When it happened, I felt I had no more choice than you have now. I would not change what I did, but I might have done it differently. When I was making my way back here, I was not thinking of the traitors. I was not thinking of Evie. I was thinking of you. It may be hard for you to hear this, and impossible to understand it, but it is the truth. I know it doesn't change anything." The principal looked up at Zach, meeting his eyes for the first time since this discussion begun. He wanted to offer him something to eat, something to drink, but knew that he did not dare. "Get some sleep, brother," he said. "You'll need your strength tomorrow." He rose and then grasped Zach's hand as he would any of the generals. "Good night." Chapter 10. Zach looked at the bundles he had packed. On the principal's orders, Robin had given him a leather vest and breeches, piles of soft cotton tunics and trousers, and a thick cloak made of new wool. There were blankets and drinking skins, enough metal for a family to live on a year, and in the capital, a bow and arrows, a short sword from the museum collections, and a sharp, well-balanced knife. He glanced about the room, not wanting to leave it, aware that he would never see it again, and his eyes came to rest on the feathered lyre, still hanging on the wall. He was hesitant to take it. He felt that it now belonged to the principal, given to him forever on the day Zach had left it by the ruined campsite. Of course, Will couldn't play, and probably wouldn't even want it as a painful reminder of what had happened. He slipped it off its peg and sat on the chair by the bed and began awkwardly to attach and tune a set of strings. His hands were no longer as flexible as they once had been in spite of Jonah's arts. The broken fingers had not set quite properly, and he had been out of practice for many years. He began to pluck the strings, playing a song that had been a favorite of his and Will's. He had first learned it in the days just before the final assault on the Capitol, when Will, Zach, and a handful of the principal's men had been hiding out in the long underground tunnels that radiated from the Capitol, like the anchoring strands of a spider's web. At first, he could not make the strings respond the way he wanted them to, but his fingers soon remembered what to do. The melancholy tone filled the room and seemed to fill Zach's body, too, with an aching sadness and regret for all that had been, and all that would never be. In a very few hours, it would be dawn and time to go. After leaving the principal, he had bathed and dressed for the journey, knowing that sleep would be impossible for what remained of the night. The flickering shadows cast by a single fish oil lamp seemed to move in rhythm to the music. He was startled by a sound and looked up, his hands still on the strings. His guard put his head just inside the door, blinking sleepily. "You have a visitor," he said. Zach straightened in the chair. No doubt Will had last-minute questions about the traitors. The door swung open and Evie entered. "I couldn't sleep," she said, "and then I heard you playing. Please don't stop." Zach stared at her, his fingers still moving over the strings, but his hands were suddenly shaking so violently that he produced a jumbled discord. "You mustn't come in here," he said. She didn't answer. He saw that she, too, was trembling. She remained just inside the doorway. The guard shrugged and left, closing the door. He set the lyre on the bed for what seemed many minutes, but was probably only a moment or two. They continued to look at each other. She was wearing the same light blue tunic and trousers she had worn that morning, and her hair was pulled into a knot on the back of her head, making her appear very much a grown woman. Yet somehow the new maturity made Zach realize how very young she was still. Her face was as pale as he remembered it that first day at her parents' house, all those years ago, and he felt as if her eyes were piercing his heart. At last he looked away. "Ah, Evie," he said. He heard her soft footsteps approaching. "Zack, we must talk," she said. He couldn't think what to say. He looked up to see her standing before him, looking as frightened as he felt. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said. "Both of you. There is no choice for either of us." Evie sat at the edge of the end of the bed, rather, and looked down at her feet. Her right hand was turning the dilapidated bracelet on her left wrist, and he realized with a jolt that it had been the feather bracelet he had once made for her. At last she spoke. "I know him, Zack. He doesn't really want to send you away. You mustn't let him do it." It is his decision," Zack said. "He is the principal." He sat a moment more in silence, then stood and walked to the window. It had begun to rain, and he could see nothing beyond the glass but blurry points of light. "During all these years, I've thought of you," she said. Then, "I remembered everything that happened when we were together and wondered what caused you to do what you did." You know the principal's reputation," said Zack. "He told me himself," she said, but you knew it too before you took me from my family, Zack. When we were together, you used to protect me by keeping the truth to yourself. There's no need to do that now." Zack sighed. "Oh, Evie. Oh, when Will sent me to fetch you, I had never done such a thing for him before. I'd always hated his dealings with young girls. It was the only important thing we ever disagreed on. He asked me to do it just that once because I was the only person he could trust. I refused for several weeks. Finally, he promised that if I agreed, it would be the last time he would ask me such a thing. The last time he would buy a girl I shouldn't have, but I finally agreed. Then, when I came to know you, it seemed that all that mattered was to see you safe. I couldn't bear the thought of what might happen if I took you to him." She was silent for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice shook. "This has always been between you since you were boys. Since we were boys," said Zack. "And it was the cause of the trouble between him and the mistress, wasn't it? I've wondered about that so often. I always assumed it was because of something he did in the garden before he went away, that he must have taken one of the women or girls without obeying the law for mate selection. Was that it?" "That's what he thinks," said Zack. That's what she let him think." "Then what was it?" Evie rose from the bed and came over to the window. She put her hand on Zack's arm. He started and drew back, wondering how much more to tell her. "He was and is the most brilliant child of the garden. Most brilliant child the garden had ever produced," Zack finally said. "He was able to read almost before he could walk. He was the ultimate product of what our mother had tried to do. His father was selected very carefully, much more so than mine. She loved my father, but he died soon after they coupled." He paused, aware that his words were wandering. He thought a moment before continuing, wanting to be certain that Evie understood. "He was raised as carefully as he was bred, to maximize his gifts. His lessons were different from the rest of us, broader, more intensive. It was my mother's plan that he would be the greatest scientist the garden had ever produced. It was her plan that he would do in one lifetime what it might take the garden generations to achieve. But he didn't want to follow someone else's plan?" said Evie. Zack began to pace about the room. He was always more interested in the forces of history than in the work going on in the garden. He saw what we did there as a tool, as something that could help to build a new world. But he wanted to be the one to build that world. He shrugged. "I always understood that our Our mother never did, and she never forgave him. I think she came to, said Evie thoughtfully. Perhaps, said Zach. In any case, what happened when Will left was just the excuse for a final break. It had been coming a long time. He knew it, and she knew it. But everything he had done since has been based on the philosophy of the garden, she said. Yes, said Zach. That's why I joined him after I too left the garden. That's why I've fought for him all these years. Done what he asked me without question, and forgiven his dark side. But have you never but you have never forgiven it, said Evie. What? Zach looked up. Yeah. You have not forgiven him, Zach. If you had, you wouldn't have taken me to the garden 5 years ago, no matter how much you cared about me. Will was right about that. And you wouldn't be prepared now to turn away from everything you both believe in unless you are still holding on to your anger at him. Zach thought a moment and sighed. I don't know, he said. You might be right, but it doesn't have any bearing on what is between us now, Evie. You must know how important loyalty is to him. I betrayed that loyalty. It is time I kept a promise to him. He looked at the bundles he had packed lying in a heap beside the door. Evie continued to stand at the window, her eyes dark pools in the flickering light. What will you do? He asked. I'm not returning to the garden. I'm not returning to the garden, she said. I've sent for my things. You can't go with me. You know that. I never thought to go with you, she said. She sounded angry. She raised her head, and he could see tears shining in her eyes. No matter how much I might want to, even if you wanted me, I couldn't go because it's more important to stay here and fight. And you must stay too. How long will it be till the traitors decide to make Will a target? Zach, stay and help us fight them. You know how they think. You can recognize their leaders. He didn't answer. He knew that she was right, and she had been. He didn't answer. He knew that she was right, as she had been the day before. I've come to understand something, she said then. Something that you understand too, but have forgotten, or that your pride won't let you see. Zach, what happens to the principal is much more important than what happens to any of us. His life is more important than pride, or love, or promise. If he should die, or something should happen to him, who among his generals is strong enough to lead? And even if one of them takes over, how committed will he be to the testing project? Only those who grew up in the garden truly understand it. Her face twisted in an effort not to cry, and Zach wanted to go to her and hold her, as he had when she was a child, but he had no comfort for her. Even if I felt it was right to stay, the principal wouldn't permit it, he said at last. Don't you want to stay? For several breaths, Zach could not answer. Then he muttered, What I want doesn't matter. She nodded. You and Will. I thought I knew you so well, yet I never expected such stupidity from both of you. But I'm not going to let you do this, either of you. I'm going to talk to him. I think I know how to make him listen to me. Zach felt his heart turn over. He's angry now, Evie. When he's in this sort of mood, he's unpredictable. I'm not afraid of him, she said. After a moment, she added, I only wish you felt differently. She took a handkerchief and wiped her eyes and looked at him, her face achingly lovely. Zach, she whispered. She took a step towards the door, hesitated a moment, then approached him and took his hands. Since we parted 5 years ago, there has not been a day that I haven't thought of you and missed you, she said. You opened up the world for me. You gave me a new life. No matter what happens, I want you to know that I am grateful and that I love you. He continued to look down at her a moment, trying to find the words to answer. Then he simply pulled her towards him. As he held her, all the complex feelings that had begun 5 years ago returned. He pressed his face to the top of her head and wished that he could stand here forever, holding her tightly, smelling her fragrant hair. Then he kissed her on the forehead and cheek and let her go. "Goodbye, Evie," he said. She seemed about to speak again, and then she abruptly turned and slipped out into the corridor. Zack stood thinking a moment. He did not know what she planned, but he was certain that she said, Will would not change his mind. He checked once again the things he had packed. When all was ready, he walked to the window and looked out at the town, beginning to come to sleepy life. The ache of sadness and regret that had been with him since yesterday, now a weight as heavy as the door which had sealed his traitor prison. He shut his eyes and remembered Evie, soft within his arms. Then he remembered Will, talking, gesturing, scowling, laughing. No matter what he must face in exile, he was certain it would not be as painful as the knowledge that he would never see either of them again. Chapter 11. We're going to stop it right here for now. We only have about 8 pages left. So the next chapter will be the last chapter, I believe. We've been reading from Pandora's Genes, a book by Kathryn Lance, and it is also part of a trilogy. The second book of the trilogy being Pandora's Children, and the third book being Pandora's Promise. And if you want to get your hands on a copy of that book, then most of the big book retailers will probably have it. But anyways, I will say special thanks to Kathryn Lance for letting me read this book on my channel. It's been a wonderful book. And so, yeah, if you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring that bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, or if you want to join the Discord server, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.